I don't know what you might be giving or getting for Christmas, but a first edition set just sold, just meaning very recently. A first edition set of the Lord of the Rings books, the 3-book set, sold at auction for a brain-melting $250,000. So imagine that. Think of that. I guess you don't have to imagine it. It's real. Think of that. Someone just paid $250,000 for a set of books that you can pick up at Barnes & Noble for about $37 in paperback, or $25 on Amazon right now, which I will link. And by the way, you can get both of those before Christmas. If that's what you do. The Amazon will be at your door by Christmas Eve, it says. So why? Why is someone willing to pay $250,000? And if you say it's an investment, that's right, but why is it a sound investment? Why are collectors and super fans willing to shell out that much money for a set of stories that most of us can get for a few taps on our smartphones, or we probably already have, if you're listening to this podcast? In contrast, or in context or perspective, in February, a London-based auction, I think Forum Auctions it was called, sold a fully signed first edition for approximately $337,000 in British pounds. If I have it right, it's about 288,000 British pounds. But this $250,000 sale was in the US, which is why I'm telling you in US dollars. This more than doubles the previous record from 2021 of an unsigned edition. Now, these are hard to come by, these first editions. And as time goes on, as it does, it will be harder and harder to get these sets. They'll become increasingly difficult to even come up for option. There was a run of these first edition books of only 3,000. And these books, the ones that just sold, were not only first editions, they were first impressions. So even more rare than other first editions. Now, I wish I had $300,000. And if I had it sitting around, I probably would buy these as an investment. But the danger here, of course, is that I wouldn't be able to part with them. But it does seem to me that over time, 5 years, 10 years, you're going to get a pretty significant greater return on that investment. I'm sure there's a way you could overspend, but I don't think this is it. So the question I posed remains, it still hangs in the air. Why are people willing? Why is somebody willing, or probably lots of somebody's willing to pay that? And the answer, of course, is the depth of J.R.R. Tolkien's world building, the way it connects with us emotionally, the sheer meticulousness of his craft in building Middle-earth, the care and the thought, and yes, the love that he poured into every page. Because when you dive into Middle-earth, I know I'm telling you things you already know. When you dive into Middle-earth, you're getting a ripping good story about hobbits and wizards and kings and wars and swords and friendship and sacrifice and loss and triumph and tragedy. But you're also getting a fully that sounded like I said fool, fully realized history, a mythology, a tapestry of culture and language that stretches back thousands of years. And even before all the things that have been published now revealed more of that history, the feeling of that history was definitely there in The Lord of the Rings. Now, Tolkien is well known as a language creator, and of course he is that. But I can't remember the last time somebody celebrated what a good calendar creator he is. And yet, he very much is that. The way that he keeps time in Middle-earth shapes the story that we're telling. Yeah, if you don't pay attention, it can be imperceptible, but the feeling is still there. The reality is there. So today, as we head towards the new year, we're going to talk about Tolkien-created calendars, and not the kind that you buy that Alan Lee illustrated, but the calendars created by Tolkien in Middle-earth. My name is Larry, and you are listening to the Tolkien Podcast. It is always my hope that the Tolkien Podcast is good year-round and doesn't feel dated. But as this is being recorded, it is late December. Personally, for me, 2025 has been a trying year, but also it's the year I launched the Tolkien Podcast. And I'm sure that personally for many listeners, it's also been a trying year. And yet, if you're listening, it looks like we made it. We're likely to have made it through. And we will go on into 2026, which also looks to be set up to be a trying year. So we're talking about Tolkien and time. Because as I mentioned, the way that Tolkien structures his calendars in Middle-earth is one of those little master strokes that makes his world feel so rich and so lived in. So then it all starts really with the Shire reckoning, the calendar that hobbits use in the Shire, in The Lord of the Rings. It also is tied to the moon, if you recall, besides vivid descriptions of trees and leaves and landscape and gullies. We hear moon reports fairly frequently in the book. I actually haven't read them for a while. Maybe that's bad. Well, I remember at least that we got moon reports. I hope that's accurate. Now, if you're like most readers, you probably haven't given a ton of thought to the Shire reckoning. It's just there, kind of in the background, right? Like it's a quaint little detail that adds color to the Hobbit's world and to Middle-earth. But here's the thing. The Shire reckoning is actually a crucial part of how Tolkien tells his story. It's the timetable on which we experience the events of The Lord of the Rings. You'll recall that in Tolkien's subcreation, he uses the Red Book of the West March as a framing device. That's a means that it's an in-story way that he tells his story. In a in-world manuscript, he lets the hobbits themselves be the storytellers because this tale is epic in the Third Age of Middle-earth. This is done, one, because it's a sequel to The Hobbit, so that's what we're used to. That's who we know. That's our entry point. So we get more Bilbo Baggins. And by the way, I'm curious if other people feel this way. I've always wondered about this, but when I first read The Lord of the Rings after having read The Hobbit, I was on a trip with my family in Missouri, of all places. Springfield, Missouri, if there's anybody out there. Anyway, it took me a minute to warm up to Frodo. I didn't really want to like him because I was so fond of Bilbo after reading The Hobbit. I wonder if anyone else had that experience. Frodo had to really win me over, to be honest. Anyhow, one, it's a sequel to The Hobbit. And two, because the Shire reckoning is important because it's relatable to it's a relatable way to talk about the characters who live for like hundreds or thousands of years, and they're kind of incomprehensible. Even the lifespan of, say, Aragorn is hard to wrestle with for us mortals who live for 100 years if we're super lucky, and then elves much longer than that. So the hobbits are the everyman and are so relatable. It's one of the strengths of the story, and we see the elves, these immortal beings, through them. We see the Maiar through them. The Maiar, if anyone needs a recap, are the angelic world creation beings like Gandalf and Sauron and Sauron and Melkor, and if you want to make an argument, Ungoliant and Balrogs. Actually, there's people who would argue that Ungoliant is not that. In fact, probably I would give a lot of credence to the people who Ungoliant was a darkness and a hunger that wasn't exactly a Maiar. Anyway, you argue about that later. Shire Reckoning is a calendar that feels kind of cozy. It's a calendar that reflects the Hobbit's love of simplicity and comfort and good tilled earth. And so by framing The Lord of the Rings around Shire Reckoning, it almost feels like the structure that it's built on. I don't want to be cliched. I say everything is the architecture, but I feel like it's the structure that he builds his story on, the Shire Reckoning. And he's grounding this epic tale in these humble and homey kind of values. He's saying, yes, we're going on this grand adventure, but you're going to see it through the eyes of the little people. And this isn't important, but I can't help what I just said. It just sparks in my brain that one of the most famous clips or the moments from the Lord of the Rings film trilogy is when Galadriel says to Frodo that even the smallest person may change the course of things. And if I just basically said that about is, paraphrasing Tolkien, that we see the story through the eyes of the little people, through the eyes of the Hobbit and their Shire-centric way of marking time. And that's pretty great, like that Tolkien could do that. But that's where things just start to get extra interesting, because Shire Reckoning isn't the only calendar in Lord of the Rings. In fact, far from it. As the story unfolds, we start to get hints and glimpses of almost like we're looking through keyholes at clues of other ways of reckoning time in Middle-earth, which creates distinct cultures easily, but without going into a ton of detail, right? He's not wasting time. He's doing this in an efficient and practical way and giving us a sense of these things without having to explain them. And these older ancient calendar systems that harken back to great kingdoms and cultures of the past give us a feeling of those cultures. And since we're creeping up on the new year ourselves, and maybe when you listen just after the new year, it is worth spending a minute or two on how exactly, specifically, hobbits mark their calendars. As we have our new year, how hobbits mark their new year. The Shire calendar is beautifully practical. It's 12 months, but each month is 30 days each. And every month lines up with phases of the moon, roughly. That makes it much more regular than our messy Gregorian calendar. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, more. But with this, in the real world, we have to function with like 30 days, half September, or you count knuckles to know which months are long and which are short. It's sort of a guessing game. The hobbits like their calendars steady and predictable. In fact, it's one of the few calendars, fictional or real, where every date falls on the same day of the week every single year. So if your birthday is on a Friday this year, bad news if you don't like Fridays. I think everyone wants a Friday birthday, actually. It's always on a Friday. I think the trouble would be is if it's Monday and you're a school kid and then you have to go back to school after your weekend and it's your birthday instead of like Friday when you can party as a kid. Like, you know what I'm talking about. So, if you have 30-day months and you have 12 of them, and that doesn't quite account for the full Earth around the sun. So they divide their year with a few extra festival days that don't belong to any month. They're like monthless days. Their year begins with after Yule, but before that you have Yule days 1 and Yule 2. Those are days. And they're equivalent basically to our New Year's Eve and our New Year's Day. So they have these celebration days, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, Yule 1 and Yule 2, that mark the turning of the year. And then halfway through the calendar, you get Lithe days, which are midsummer holidays, which are packed with feasting and games and beer. And in leap years, there's an extra overlithe, because hobbits are the kind of people who would absolutely turn an extra day into another day of feasting, games, and beer. So Tolkien wasn't just being clever and trying to devise like a different calendar. He actually made a calendar that reflects a system for keeping that reflects the values of the hobbits. It's constant in its rhythms. It's anchored around community and moments of time and food and celebration. And even the way they count time carries the sense of contentment and order. The way they like a quiet garden, they like a quiet month. It's a little bit of a defiant gesture, defiant reckoning against the larger chaotic world that can exist. So the Shire reckoning is specifically to the Shire hobbits. Maybe we'll mention the others, but Bree had a different calendar. So it's a way of marking time that's tied to the rhythms of the Shire, to planting, harvesting, changing of the seasons, the ebb and flow of a hobbit's life. And in the Shire, years are measured in Shire years. Those are pretty roughly with their Lithe days and their overlithe days. It really related to our own, which is the Earth going around the sun. So it all works out. But I don't know about you, but I actually would be in favor. I think it'd be great if we had all the months had 30 days and we have these Yule days that are not even part of the year, kind of built-in party days. We do it anyway. We have holidays, of course, but they also, of course, months have different names. Of course they do. Why they would be ridiculous if they didn't. Their names are things that are, kind of evoke the world they live in and love. So names like After Yule is perfectly logical. They have one called Solmath and Astron and Holomath, which is for the harvest for September. And of course, knowing Tolkien, all these have word histories. They're not just pulled out of a hat. There's reasons why they're called those. And then September, the harvest, Halamath. There's October, which is called Winterfilth, means the harvest is over. Now, our own months, this is not easy to remember. It seems like it should be obvious, but I had to refresh my memory. But our months are mostly named after Roman things. So June is named after Juno, the queen of the Roman gods and goddesses of marriage and childbirth. So I guess it's good enough to get her name. I had an aunt, June, who passed away in 2025. One of the many funerals I went to in 2025. And that month used to be, that's July actually. It was called Quintilis, I believe. And that was their 5th month. But Quintilis was renamed in honor of Julius Caesar. That's how we get July, which seems a little absurd to me now. Who cares about Julius Caesar? I'd much rather call it a Hobbit name. Halamath would be great. October comes from octo, which means 8, I think, in Latin. Not that I think it does. It does mean that, but I think everyone probably could catch on to that because it used to be the 8th month. But later in Roman calendars, January and February were added to the beginning of the Roman year. So even though their month, October, was the 8th month, it got moved. It became the 10th month. So it doesn't even make sense. Our modern month names are basically Roman gods and emperors and leftover numbers that don't match up anymore. It's nice, but it's chaotic compared to the Hobbits' Earth season-based naming. I guess since it's December here, we should talk about a Shire reckoning. December was called for Yule, very clearly meaning before the Yule, the 2 Yule days that I talked about. Yule is the last day of the year and not part of any month. I think I said that. And then Yule is the first day of the year, not part of any month. And then we're back to January, which is called after Yule. So for Yule, 2 Yule days, and after Yule. That's pretty cool, I think. I would vote for that change. To really appreciate how clever the Shire calendar is, though, it helps to remember how ours works. I said that we'd talk more about the Gregorian calendar. I think that's probably, or maybe depending on your mood, how it doesn't work. But we live by this thing called the Gregorian calendar, and it's been in use since, I think, the 1500s, but I know that it was Pope Gregory the 13th who decided to fix some of the drift. And that was from the older calendar, which was a little messier, and that was called the Julian calendar, if I have my facts straight, which I think I do. And then that had some problems, but we have 12 months, and they don't divide evenly. As I mentioned, you're counting on your knuckles, or 30 days hath September. And then our calendar every, February, the shortest, weirdest month. I'm not sure why we wouldn't give February 30 days and take a couple of the 31 days down, but whatever. February has to grab an extra day every 4 years. We call that leap year. Because the sun and the earth don't perfectly orbit exactly. So it kind of drifts. We keep patching up those holes, which is, good. Before you think about a non-Gregorian calendar as just this strange hobbit thing, this quaint little farmer thing, there are places on earth today now where people follow different calendars entirely, not the Gregorian calendar. In Ethiopia, for example, the days and the months and the year itself are just different. They just tick different. Their calendar has 13 months and 12 with 30 days each, like a Hobbit. And then instead of having those floating days like the Shire does, they have a 13th month, which is 5 or 6 days, 6 in a leap year, the really short month. And they're also about 7 or 8 years behind the Gregorian year that most of us use, which is called increasingly not AD, but Common Era, CE. And their new year starts in September. And of course, I think everyone knows about the Chinese New Year is not the same as the Gregorian New Year. So they know that. But those countries, those places are not alone. Nepal runs on the Bikram Sambat calendar, and pardon the pronunciation. I'm probably try hard to get all the Tolkien names pronounced correctly, but my non-English language names are pretty hopeless. Anyway, Israel has an Hebrew calendar, and Iran and Afghanistan is on a thing called the Solar Hijri calendar, I think, and much of the Islamic world has a similar thing for rituals like Ramadan. So the most common, I think, I kind of feel like everybody, at least in the United States, but I think other places too, they have the traditional Chinese New Year. They know about that. Those billion people they have kind of make it important to pay attention. So humanity's got a lot of ways to keep time, and it's changed, and our even our current system's not that new. I mean, it's not that old. It is rather new in the big scheme of things. So compared to all those modern day, whatever age of Earth we're in these days, whatever Middle Earth, whatever we call it, the Shire reckoning feels smooth to me, without these wild swings and no rhyme and rhythm breaking. It's tidy and it's predictable, and it's really actually Hobbit-like, which I'm not always sure I'm suited for Hobbit life, but the months sound good. But you always know where you stand. You know where the next festival is, which is really what I think they'd like. And I like the idea that there's days that are out of a month. I think that's really cool. Well, let's look at the Númenóreans, for example, because I said earlier that the Hobbits calendar was not the only calendar. They the Númenóreans, these are the people that were Aragorn's ancestors. They had a mighty island kingdom in the midst of the seas, and at their height they approached even the elves in their might and their valor and their long lives. They got a little greedy though. This is some of what Amazon is telling with its Lord of the Rings series, which, by the way, is exactly the right thing to do. Tell that story. Númenóreans, full on 5 seasons, but I wish it. Well, it doesn't matter what I wish. It's not the way I would tell it, but I think they are telling the right story. So, a lot of these. There's all kinds of, the Númenóreans. So they use the cycles of the stars and the moon, and in their calendar reflected their greatness kind of, and their wisdom, but also their pride. Like they were kind of, the way their calendar worked made them think they were cooler and above the rest of Middle Earth, exempt from normal calendars. And the Shire reckoning also has years attached. All of them do. So Shire reckoning year 1 corresponds to the third age of 1601, if I have that right. Year 1 in Shire reckoning is 1601, which is lovely of Tolkien to do. It makes it really convenient. That's the year that the colonization of the Shire happened by the Bree Hobbits. We were named Marcho and Blanco, by the way. And so the third age can really be converted to Shire year or Shire reckoning by subtracting 1600. And Bree, I think, is you subtract 1300. They were in Bree first and migrated over to the Shire. So when the Hobbits were still wandering, they had these calendars, and their basic unit was not a week like ours, but a month, governed by the moon, more or less. And the new year would begin after the harvests, like winter filth, which means the filling of the year before winter filth. So their calendar got kind of tainted though when they met, different calendars. And then the elves, the firstborn, who have been around since the dawn of the world, before there was a sun and the moon, they had their own way of reckoning time, and it's more fluid and kind of more flexible, and mortals can't really comprehend that, which is another cool thing that Tolkien did. He made a thing bigger than our minds can fathom for these mainly immortal beings, which is super cool. So as the Lord of the Rings unfolds, we start to see these other calendars, and they're kind of just peeking through the cracks. I think I said keyhole earlier. I think I like that. Like you look through the keyhole into this other concept of culture and calendar and time. So back to the thesis of this is one of the reasons these books are what they are and they're so meaningful and why they sell for $250,000 is because of some of these details. It's one of the key reasons why Tolkien's works endure. People are willing to pay a fortune for a piece of the legacy. Because you enter Middle Earth, you're not just getting a hot story, you're getting a world with its history and mythology. I think I'm repeating myself, but you get it. But that's really something special, and it's worth treasuring. So that's why people treat it as such, and that's why it becomes a treasure. Should you wish to learn more about these things or look at in great detail, you look in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings volumes and also the History of Middle-earth by Christopher Tolkien. As we head off into 2026, a year that I mentioned previously seems to me that it could be fraught with peril. And perhaps that's why it's more important than ever to value our stories, to value our values, and read about the battles, the internal battles, including external battles, the corruption of the ring, the corruption of power, the corruption of dominion over things. Those things are important to keep in mind, probably more than they ever have been. Keep your loved ones close. Love the people that you're around. Keep your values. Keep your perspective. Read your Tolkien. Read lots of good things. There's a lot of great reading. I would ask that if you do find value in this podcast, maybe click the subscribe button. I don't think I've ever asked that before. It doesn't mean we're engaged or anything. It just means there's some value in the podcast and you'd like to know about it, whatever platform you're on. And then the thing I always do ask, if you find value here, maybe just tell one other person that you heard something that you liked and maybe recommend they give it a try. The organic word of mouth sharing is the best way to kind of spread the word. I wish everybody a happy new year. Hope things are good for you. I thank you for your time and attention and your participation. Love getting emails. There will be a transcription of this podcast, and enjoy Yule 1 and Yule 2 that's coming up. My name is Larry Curtis, and you have been listening to the Tolkien Podcast.